In the ruthless courts of the music empire, Lady Taylor rises, falls, and reclaims her voice from the very powers that sought to silence her. From stolen songs to public betrayals, from legal battles to digital hauntings, this is the fable of an artist who dared to defy the industry's ancient rights before her story was written by others. Join us in this tale of power, control, and survival, where every contract is a chain, every melody a weapon, and every crown made of fragile glass. Subscribe to Glass Throne for more fables of fame, fortune, and rebellion. If this story resonates, leave a like, only if you mean it. In the heart of the most powerful courts of music, Lady Taylor emerged as a young bard, ambitious, promising, with a harp always in hand. Raised far from the palaces, yet with melodies that could charm both kings and peasants, she quickly caught the attention of Nashville's rulers. And, as always in the court, a pact was sealed. Barely a teenager, Taylor pledged her art to the House of Big Machine, a fortress that promised to make her queen of songs. In exchange, she unknowingly offered something far more precious: the rights to her very own melodies. It seemed like a fair price. She, the young maiden, would gain access to grand stages, lavish banquets, and the most coveted courts. But, hidden in the fine print of contracts forged by invisible hands, there were clauses only time would reveal. For years, Lady Taylor flourished. Her albums were treated as sacred tomes, each song a spell recited by thousands. Her presence dictated trends. Her words defined seasons. Yet, beneath the crowns and applause, a silent truth lingered. She owned none of what she created. The masters, the primal records of her work, belonged to the lord of the label, who quietly brokered alliances and charted futures that excluded Lady Taylor altogether. While she sang, others counted the gold. Then, on what should have been just another page in the industry's endless scroll, a single announcement pierced the kingdom like an arrow. Big Machine had been sold, and with it, all the songs Lady Taylor believed she had rightfully earned. The new owner, Duke Braun, a master of the shadows, a man who never strummed a chord, yet now held dominion over the most powerful spells in sound. This wasn't just a business transaction. It was the start of a silent war, woven from pride, contracts, and vengeance. And it was in that moment that Lady Taylor realized she must rise, or be erased. Lady Taylor did not crumble. Where others might have retreated into silence, she sharpened her quill and began crafting a strategy that no bard had dared attempt before. If they owned her original spells, she would simply cast them anew, stronger, clearer, unmistakably hers. Thus, the re-recording era was born, but the kingdom was divided. Some heralded her as a revolutionary, a warrior queen reclaiming what was rightfully hers. Others whispered that it was nothing but vanity, an elaborate performance to mask old wounds. The court jesters laughed, critics rolled their eyes, and the lords of commerce quietly braced for impact. Lady Taylor, however, did not waver. The first strike came with Fearless, a once innocent tome, now reforged with deliberate precision. Each note, each word, a direct challenge to the House of Big Machine and its new master. The realm listened. The winds carried, her voice farther than ever before. Yet the Duke Braun did not falter. Backed by vast resources and alliances with powerful nobles, he continued to tighten his grip on her legacy. His message was simple: the past belongs to me. But Lady Taylor had already understood the truth. This was no longer just about songs. It was about ownership, identity, and the power to define one's own legend. Behind closed doors, she gathered her allies. Sir Jack, a sorcerer of arrangements, and Dame Aaron, a guardian of melancholic melodies, stood by her side. Together, they plotted not just to survive, but to rewrite history itself. Meanwhile, the public watched, entranced. This was no longer a private feud hidden in royal chambers. It had become a spectacle, a lesson, and perhaps a warning. And as the dust settled after her first victorious strike, a familiar figure from her past emerged from the shadows, setting the stage for a far more personal battle. Because in the world of crowns and contracts, old wounds never truly heal. They only wait for the perfect moment to bleed again. From the far reaches of the kingdom, a ghost from Lady Taylor's past resurfaced. Lord Carnier, the infamous rogue of the court. Their history was already etched into the royal scrolls, beginning with that fateful night at the Grand Gala, when he stormed the stage and seized her moment of triumph, declaring that another was more deserving of the crown. That act, abrupt and brazen, left an open wound, not just for Lady Taylor, but for all who witnessed the spectacle. Years passed. Both figures ascended in their own realms, Taylor refining her art, building empires, Carnier becoming both legend and heretic in equal measure. Yet the wound remained raw, hidden beneath the layers of public reinvention, success, and carefully curated images. Just as Lady Taylor gathered her forces in the battle for her masters, Lord Carnier struck again, this time through the release of a new spell, a song called Famous. Within its venomous verses, he claimed that he had made her famous, reducing her years of toil, artistry, and resilience into a single dismissive line. For many, it was yet another provocation from the rogue noble, but for Lady Taylor, it was a calculated assassination of character, an attempt to seize control of the very narrative she was fighting to reclaim. The kingdom erupted. Loyalists rushed to her defense, decrying the insult and framing it as proof that Lady Taylor had always been the architect of her own fate. But others, cynics, jesters, and rival courtiers, whispered that perhaps the entire spectacle was a co-conspiracy, another orchestrated act within the grand theatre of fame. Yet, the deepest blow was yet to come, not from Lord Carnier, but from his consort, Lady Kim, the mistress of mirrors and illusion. Known for her mastery over the kingdom's looking glasses, those enchanted devices that reflected and distorted truth in equal measure, Lady Kim released fragments of an enchanted scroll, recorded conversations that seemed to show Lady Taylor, approving the very spell that had wounded her. The tapes spread through the kingdom like wildfire, stoking the ever-burning flames of doubt. Was Lady Taylor a victim of betrayal, ensnared by a cunning adversary, or a shrewd player, feigning outrage only when the spell turned against her? The court could not agree. Lady Taylor, besieged by suspicion and trapped in the snare of public opinion, withdrew into her chambers. Her silence was instantly seized upon by her enemies as an admission of guilt, while her supporters insisted it was the only dignified response to such treachery. But Lady Taylor was not defeated. What her adversaries mistook for surrender was, in truth, a period of recalibration. She had learned a bitter but essential lesson. In the ruthless game of crowns and contracts, perception was often deadlier than fact. Victory did not belong solely to those who sang the loudest, but to those who mastered the delicate interplay between creation and confrontation. As the echoes of Lord Carnier's song finally faded into the corridors of the kingdom, Lady Taylor emerged once more, battle-hardened, cautious, but more determined than ever, for there was another war waiting. On the horizon, one not just for her image, but for her very dignity. No sooner had the embers of the last battle cooled than Lady Taylor found herself summoned to an altogether different arena. Not the stage, not the court of public opinion, but the cold, silent chambers of the kingdom's judiciary. This time, she was not the one on trial, but her honor was. Years earlier, during one of her many ceremonial appearances, a court entertainer by the name of Lord Muller, a minor noble with no real claim to fame, had dared to violate the sacred code of conduct. During a formal gathering, as they posed for the customary portrait, he laid an uninvited hand upon her. A simple act, some claimed. An unfortunate misunderstanding, others whispered. But Lady Taylor knew what had happened, and unlike many who suffered such indignities in silence, she chose a different path. She drew her sword, not of steel, but of justice. Years after the incident, when Lord Muller sought to reclaim his tarnished name by suing her for damages, Lady Taylor countered with a suit of her own, accusing him of violating her dignity in front of witnesses. She did not seek gold or jewels. Instead, in an act that confounded many in the court, she demanded only a single silver coin, a symbolic victory, meant to show that some wounds are worth more than any treasure. The kingdom watched in fascination. Here was Lady Taylor, stripped of all her usual adornments. No stage, no band, no enchanted lights. Just her word against his, in a room where spectacle meant nothing and truth, theoretically, meant everything. Her testimony was clear, her demeanor unwavering. She faced the crossfire of Lord Muller's counsel with the same resolve she had shown on stage so many times before. And when the judgment came, it was swift and unequivocal. Lady Taylor prevailed, but in the grand halls of the kingdom, where victories are always weighed against motives, some asked, was this truly a stand for all those who had suffered in silence, or yet another carefully orchestrated act to further burnish the legend of Lady Taylor, the resilient heroine who always seemed to triumph in the end? Lady Taylor herself offered no long speeches, no victory parade. She took her symbolic coin, thanked the court, and quietly exited the chamber. But the message was sent. She had proven that even the kingdom's most celebrated figures could be vulnerable, but also that they could wield their power in defense of principle, not just profit. For many across the realm, it was a watershed moment, a signal that the age of silent suffering was over. Yet, as Lady Taylor stepped back into the chaotic streets of the kingdom, she knew that this battle, though won, was but a brief respite. The true war for autonomy, legacy, and survival in an empire built on spectacle was still far from over, and soon a new kind of collapse would send shockwaves through the realm. Victory in the courtroom gave Lady Taylor a brief moment of calm, but it was soon shattered by a new and unexpected catastrophe. This time, the battlefield was not the courts or recording chambers. It was the grand plazas of commerce, where her most loyal subjects gathered, desperate to witness her latest spectacle, the Eras Tour. Her proclamation of this monumental event sent waves through the kingdom. For years, Lady Taylor had carefully crafted each of her albums as distinct realms, and now she promised to bring them all to life in one legendary tour, a pilgrimage of music, memory, and meaning. But no one, not even her, anticipated the scale of devotion. When the gates to the grand towers of Ticketmaster, the Empire's official merchants of entry, opened, they collapsed almost instantly under the weight of demand. Millions surged forth, but only a privileged few managed to secure access. For the rest, it was chaos, glitches, delays, empty promises. The kingdom erupted. Furious citizens took up arms, not against Lady Taylor, but against the Guild of Ticketmaster, accusing it of greed, incompetence, and even foul play. Lawsuits were filed, investigations launched. Noble leaders called for inquiries into the merchant guild's monopoly over the realm's most coveted spectacle. Lady Taylor issued a statement, acknowledging the anguish of her followers, but she remained carefully distant from direct blame. Some accused her of complicity, suggesting she had long benefited from the guild's control over the kingdom's entertainment. Others defended her, insisting she was just another casualty of a broken system she could not possibly reform alone. Either way, the damage was done. The Eras Tour, intended as a triumphant return to her loyal subjects, had instead sparked a national conversation about fairness, access, and the unchecked power of the Empire's gatekeepers. Lady Taylor, ever the strategist, continued her preparations for the tour, aware that the spectacle must go on. But beneath the anticipation and the rehearsals, she surely knew this fiasco had shifted the ground beneath her feet. And just as the towers of Ticketmaster had collapsed, so too would other structures she once believed to be unshakable. Just as Lady Taylor prepared to step onto the grand stages of the Eras Tour, another threat emerged, one more insidious than broken contracts or merchant guilds. This time, the assault came from the shadows of the realm itself, conjured not by noble rivals but by faceless sorcerers wielding dark technology, the creators of deep fakes. Overnight, fabricated images of Lady Taylor, crude, obscene, and wholly false, spread like a silent plague across the kingdom's enchanted mirrors and message scrolls. These illusions were crafted with such deceptive precision that many, at first glance, could not discern truth from manipulation. The kingdom gasped. For decades, Lady Taylor had fought to control her image, to reclaim her voice, to define her own narrative. Yet here, in this new arena, her power seemed almost irrelevant. The tools of this dark magic required neither contracts nor alliances, just code, malice, and anonymity. As the false images proliferated, so did the public's unease. If such illusions could be conjured so easily, what protection remained for any figure in the public eye? For any citizen, noble or peasant? Lady Taylor responded swiftly, condemning the attacks and calling for new laws to regulate this unchecked sorcery. Her voice echoed through the courts and assemblies, demanding that the kingdom confront the terrifying implications of this technology before it consumed all sense of reality. Some heralded her as a champion of privacy, a necessary voice in an age where illusions threatened to eclipse identity itself. Others, more cynical, accused her of seizing the moment for personal gain, positioning herself once again as the central figure in the cultural battleground. But regardless of motive, the episode marked a turning point. Lady Taylor had long battled lords, merchants, and public perception. Now, she was at war with the very fabric of truth. And as the deepfakes continued to ripple across the kingdom, Lady Taylor prepared herself for yet another confrontation, one that would pull her from technological warfare back into the heart of political conflict. Because in the empire of fame, no war exists in isolation. For much of her reign, Lady Taylor had kept her politics locked away behind the walls of her private chambers. In a kingdom where entertainers were expected to charm, not challenge, she had long adhered to the unspoken rule: sing your songs, collect your gold, and leave governance to the lords. But times changed. The empire grew restless, its people divided by bitter ideologies, and the fires of social upheaval spread from the rural villages to the grandest courts. Lady Taylor watched in silence, until one day she didn't. In a moment that stunned even her most loyal subjects, Lady Taylor stepped into the public square and for the first time raised her voice not in melody, but in political defiance. She endorsed Democratic candidates, denouncing figures whose policies, she believed, endangered the vulnerable and silenced the marginalized. It was an act of defiance that few in her position dared, and it came with a cost. From across the realm, Lord Trump, the exiled emperor and still one of the most fearsome voices in the land, took aim at Lady Taylor. In his usual fashion, he did not wield subtlety, but venom, dismissing her as overrated and irrelevant, accusing her of betraying the noble traditions of the kingdom. The kingdom erupted in debate. Her supporters hailed her as a courageous sovereign, finally breaking free from the golden cage of enforced neutrality. They filled the public squares with songs of her bravery, transforming her stance into an anthem for a generation seeking change. But others, particularly in the old guard, decried her as a symbol of celebrity arrogance, a bard who had forgotten her place. They argued that Lady Taylor had weaponized her influence, turning her art into propaganda, her court into a political machine. For Lady Taylor, the consequences were immediate and personal. Long-time alliances frayed. Some noble houses turned their backs. Certain territories, where Lord Trump's influence still reigned, saw her as a pariah. But in other regions, especially among the younger, restless vassals, her popularity soared beyond anything she had previously known. It was, as ever, a double-edged sword. Yet Lady Taylor did not retreat. Having tasted the power of her voice in the realm of policy as much as melody, she continued to speak out on issues she once avoided: climate, equality, justice. Her political awakening became not just a chapter in her story, but a defining arc. And while the court debated endlessly whether her motives were pure or calculated, Lady Taylor had already moved on to her next battle. Because in the empire of fame, every stance is a risk, every word a weapon, and silence is no longer an option. Now, as the political dust began to settle, another unexpected summons dragged her into yet another court, a legal entanglement not of her making, but one that threatened her most sacred bond: friendship. As the kingdoms quieted and the public's gaze shifted elsewhere, Lady Taylor remained at the center of yet another unfolding chapter. Though her past battles had reshaped the industry's rules and redrawn the map of celebrity influence, the game was far from over. Rumors whispered through the courts of new alliances being forged, of silent rivalries brewing beneath smiles at royal banquets. The sorcerers of technology continued to conjure ever more dangerous illusions, and the guilds of commerce devised new contracts designed to outmaneuver even the savviest of sovereigns. Meanwhile, younger bards, many inspired by her defiance, others determined to reject her example, prepared their own rebellions, ready to claim their place on the shifting stage. Lady Taylor, for all her victories and scars, had no choice but to keep moving. In the empire of fame, still and silent figures fade fast, while those who adapt survive. And somewhere, beyond the walls of her carefully guarded estate, another bard now faces their own reckoning, perhaps with a song they don't truly own, a reputation built on fragile alliances, or an image vulnerable to manipulation. The cycle continues, because in this realm, no legend is ever truly complete, only paused, waiting for the next verse to be written by another hand, another voice. If you want to hear those stories of ambition, betrayal, and survival, subscribe to Glass Throne. Here, the tales are real, but the legends are eternal.